Good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm David Dale, your moderator this morning. I'm from the School of Pharmacy here at the University of Colorado. This is panel number 5305. So if you're looking for cleansing rituals, the art of healing, you're in the right room. We have four panelists today: Patricia, Elliott, Jean Houston, Joaquin Munoz, and Liz Weir. And Joaquin has asked to lead off the general comments.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk very generally about some of the ideas that my tribe has about cleansing rituals and healing rituals. Talk a little bit about a couple of studies that have been done, and then I'm going to mention a brief and personal story about cleansing and healing. The first question that we have to ask is, what is the purpose of cleansing? What is the purpose of the cleansing ceremony to begin with? And generally, the purpose of the cleansing ceremony is a necessity to return to some sort of balance of some sort. Many Native peoples believe that the community that we existed in and continue to exist in today is not just made up of the people that surround you. We work in conjunction with the people that are around us. We work in conjunction with nature, and then there's a relationship between the two that's important to foster as well. So when something happens to upset that balance, there needs to be some sort of ceremony to return the equilibrium. Not only in the sense that perhaps we may have wronged a neighbor or hurt someone unintentionally or intentionally, the need to return the balance to ensure that the harsh feelings do not remain. In a way, it's almost contradictory to what most people understand about how we live life, because many people who follow Catholic Christian beliefs will say that it's important to atone. It's only important to atone because the afterlife is what is essential. In many Native cultures, it's the exact opposite, where the life that we're living here and now in this existence is what is important to maintain the balance. The spiritual world will take care of itself afterwards, and we'll worry about that when we get there. But it's essential to maintain the balance and maintain the equilibrium here and now. Healing, which goes in some ways hand in hand with cleansing, is also we have some Yaqui ceremonies that are done, and also there are many Native ceremonies that are done for healing purposes. And the healing purposes are essentially to be free of disease. And I don't mean disease in terms of having a cold or having some kind of virus. I mean dis-ease, as in being out of ease, again, out of equilibrium, out of balance. And there are several ceremonies that are done, and I'll give you a couple of books that you might want to look at to get an idea of some of the things that have been done historically and that continue to be done in present time. The Yaqui ceremonies, our Yaqui ceremonies coincide with Easter, and we have a ceremony that's done right before what would be called Holy Week, and it's called tineblas. That's the Spanish word for whipping. And what is done is the participants in the ceremonies are asked to lie down in the middle of the plaza or inside the church where ceremonies are done, and the women of the church come by and with large rawhide whips will whip your back. And it seems kind of harsh and in a way rather barbaric. I've actually heard it referred to in some instances, but it's highly symbolic. And again, the reason being because it's the need to return to that equilibrium. We realize that we are not perfect. We realize that our actions can hurt some people intentionally and unintentionally, and we realize that, again, there is a need to return to the balance within the people that we exist with. So the purpose of the ceremony is for the women to go through, whip your backs, and you are ceremonially cleansed of the wrongdoing that you have done, and thus you are ready to embark on a new year and begin again and go through your trials and tribulations as a human being, making mistakes and being able to atone for them in this lifetime. There was a study that was done by a professor at the University of Arizona. His name is Dr. Tom Holm, H-O-L-M, and I don't remember the name of the book right now. I read it a long time ago. What he did was he did a study of returning Vietnam veterans, native Vietnam veterans, and he studied, he did interviews with 200 native veterans, and all of who had returned from some sort of active combat duty, and interviewed them. He followed the process of their return, followed the process of their reorientation into general society to see how they did, essentially. And he made a distinction between two parts of this group of 200. One part of the group of 200 went through ceremonial cleansing and healing ceremonies within their respective tribes. He didn't stay with one tribe; he went to many different ones, and so he documented some of their cleansing ceremonies and the fact that they actually happened. And the other part of the group was the group that did not receive the traditional native cleansing ceremonies. And interestingly enough, he found that the ones who had received their indigenous cleansing ceremonies were the ones who were better adjusted and more able to function on a daily basis, other than in converse to the other ones who had not received the cleansing ceremonies and were having issues with post-traumatic stress disorder and other troublesome affairs. The other book that I would recommend to you is one by a scholar named Vine Deloria Jr. He wrote a book called God is Red, and it's a really interesting book. It's somewhat controversial because it's a bit of a condemnation of European Christianity as it came to the New World. But there are certain parts in there where he does discuss the importance of cleansing and healing within Native communities, and specifically he talks about one important aspect of this. He talks about place. And I bring this up because this is still an important issue to me, because there are a lot of Native peoples who are still fighting for lands and fighting for sacred sites that are being used for whatever the case may be. Mount Graham in Arizona is a perfect example, where it's a sacred site for many of the Native tribes in the area, and the University of Arizona went and built a telescope on it. And there are the continuing fights for places like the Black Hills and various lakes and other natural areas. The reason, again, for that necessity and what Vine Deloria talks about is the need to return that equilibrium between nature, between human, and between community, and the relationship between the three. It's essential to do that while you are here existing, because that leads to a healthy life. One question I want to ask rather briefly, and then I'll go into this story about my personal story, is we talk about doing cleansing rituals and we talk about doing cleansing ceremonies for healing, and I wonder, what do we need to be cleansed and healed of? Is there something in sort of our collective consciousness or our collective psyche, or just, and as each and every one of us as individuals, what is going on inside of us that we feel the need to find a ceremony or some sort of ritual to cleanse ourselves of? And I will give you my personal story, because my cleansing ritual involved years of years of depression that I had to deal with for most of my life. Like many people that I encounter on a daily basis, I found that I was full of a great deal of fear and self-loathing, and to the point that actually even looking at myself and facing myself as a human being was extremely difficult, because I didn't know who I was and I didn't know where I was. I went to Italy with some friends, and I went with a particular teacher who is a professor but is also one of the wisest people I know. And I came back from a tour that we had where we had inadvertently gotten lost in the middle of Rome, 30 minutes out of the way from where we were supposed to be. And this lady was following me around, complaining the entire time about the fact that we were lost. And I found that I didn't have any natural defense against it. I found that I had to accept everything that she was telling me and validate her feelings by saying, I agree, yeah, you're right, this is horrible, this is terrible, when everything in me was rebelling, saying, there's no need to validate anything this woman is telling you at all. But whatever internal programming in my head was telling me, this is absolutely, you have to agree, you have to be cordial, even if you don't want to. We went and spoke to this professor, and we sat up for about 2.5, almost 3 hours talking about what it meant to be human and what it meant to be conscious and what it meant to be a conscious person. And I came to the conclusion that it is perfectly acceptable to be a conscious person in this world, and it means that I have the right to care for myself and defend myself. For the first time in 24 years of life on this earth, I could look at myself in the mirror without being afraid. And I could look at myself in the mirror and accept myself for who I was and what I was. So the next day, and I love telling this story because it imbued me with so much power, was we were walking toward the Vatican Museum, and this woman who had gotten the idea that it was perfectly acceptable to come and complain to me about whatever she wanted, comes up to me again and starts complaining. The line is too long. We're going to be here forever. I can't believe we have to stand in line for all this just to go see the Vatican. And I ignored her completely. And she followed me some more and started complaining some more and complaining some more, and again, I ignored her. We're waiting in line, and about 20 minutes later, she comes up to me and says, you know, I've been saying good morning to you all day, and you haven't responded at all. And this was my response, verbatim. I paused for a moment, I looked her in the eye, and I said, oh. An incredibly simple and easy thing to do, but when you've lived 24 years of your life with self-loathing and fear, you have to understand that that was a personal revolution for me. To me, and I give you this personal story because I want to be able to show you that these things still do occur. To be cleansed in my mind and to be healed in my mind is, again, to be free of disease, to be free to be balanced within yourself, and most importantly, to not be afraid of who you are and what you are, and to be able to exercise the personal demons within that keep you from living as full a life as you possibly can. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. Liz?
Thank you. If you've come expecting me to talk about Celtic rituals, the old Celtic calendar, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about it because I don't know enough about it. It's not the tradition in which I grew up. I was looking around the internet and boy, you can find all sorts of stuff there. I'm going to talk a bit about folk cures and folk traditions and different types of healing, which have been around a long time. But first of all, I'm sure, like me, you've maybe read an article, it appeared a couple of years ago in the Washington Post about cleansing rituals in Africa, where they're designated paid cleansers, and their job is after a woman has been widowed or a woman has lost a child, to sleep with that woman and to cleanse her of the evil spirits. Obviously, with HIV/AIDS in Africa, this is a very dangerous thing, and it's caused people to question. The women themselves obviously never did like it happening, but that was their way. And so maybe we're looking at the art of cleansing and cleansing rituals. We'll think about things that people used to do maybe, and they thought it was quite valid, but now modern society is changing that. I mentioned yesterday to Gordon Adams that I was on this panel, and as many of you know, he's a fine poet, and he had actually written a poem about that African cleansing ritual, and I'd like to read it to you, because one of the best things about CWA is how panels overlap, how arts can overlap with politics. It's called The Cleanser. The cleanser is always first at the feast, collar hanging open over a concave chest, his lean frame draped with a grease-stained suit, borrowed from a dead man, the ugly shadow of a gigolo, a white visor of stolen paper banded by thin string to his head, shades his bloodshot and hungry eyes. When men and children die, their wives and mothers must be cleansed. The spirits of loss and loneliness must be driven away. He is the drunken scythe of death, stalking the living cities of hell, reaping pain with the broken glass of a shattered pint of ale. His cleansing empties houses, orphans children, fills hospitals and hospice wards, spreading disease, until the wretched, thinly stretched skin of the emaciated hold only the hollow eyes of hopelessness. This cleansing is his contribution to the bereaved and lonely women. His unguarded and unwarranted intimacy transforms sorrow and loss into sickness and fear. He purifies, sanctifies, banishes the ghosts, satisfies his own lust in a constantly changing home, and leaves death in his wake. I am clean like water, he cries. Unwanted death shakes our world. The women cry, the old men shake their heads. In the end, we may all die for our traditions. And that's one of the African traditions. In Northern Ireland, some people were dying for their traditions as well. So I didn't grow up in the tradition of, taking a newly delivered woman to be churched in the Catholic Church before she was sort of able to come back and join everybody else. I went to a Sunday school when I was very small where it was really exciting. I'd rejected the tradition of my mother and my father, Church of Ireland Methodist, for what was known as the Gospel Tabernacle. The whole front of the church lifted off, and people were plunged into the water to be washed in the blood of the Lamb, and as Joaquin said, to make atonement for their sins. I must have been saved, 20 times by the time I was 10. I did things like watching television on a Sunday and going to the cinema. And the pastor of the church was a man whose name you might know. His name was Pastor Paisley. And he had a son, you maybe know about that one, yeah? So that's how I spent my early formative years. Fortunately, then I moved away to other things. But the whole idea of healing, searching for healing, for me, my personal healing, and I'll say this before I go into some of the healings that I've heard about, is to walk in the forest with my dog. I look at the sky above me. I smell the beautiful clear air of County Antrim, Glens and Antrim. And I'm all alone there. It's 5 weeks since I've done that. Next Saturday, I'll be out there, and you think about me there. And I'm feeling the worst of it. I really need to be, if you like, purged, away from people, away from cities, just to be out there with, I feel as though I'm the only person in the world. That's my personal healing. That doesn't mean I don't go to reflexology and kinesiology, which actually very much ease my physical feelings, those sore muscles, the damage that's done. I need that as well, and I really totally believe in that. But I still meet a lot of people who believe in cures. In Ireland, we have these holy wells, and it's amazing that, again, when the Christian church came in, they built a lot of churches on ancient Celtic places, holy places. So you'll see places like Tobermore, Tubber in Irish is a well, the big well. And I could bring it to them now in 2005, and you'd have an old tree, and it would have scraps of material tied, where people have wet the material in the well and tied them up onto the tree branches. Sometimes people go there to wish and put prayers up. Other times, maybe it's for warts that will just drop off as the material rots. And you hear people who are very cynical about this. I've seen things like this happen. My daughter's great-grandmother had charms. She could charm burns, warts, verrucas. She was an amazing woman. She refused any money for it. She believed it was a gift from God. And people would come from all over the country. And I have seen a burn heal. I've seen verrucas drop off, or warts drop off, verrucas heal. She refused money because people brought her gifts and so on. So I've had to have faith in watching that sort of thing. In Ireland, if you say to any group of older people, what would you do if a child had whooping cough? They'd say, pass the child under the donkey. And that's what used to be done. I don't know, there are not so many donkeys around nowadays. Or if a person had quinsy, the sore throat, you heat salt in a sock and you wrap it around the neck, and that cured it. A wart, do any of you know any cures for warts? Well, you could cut a potato in half, rub a half, and bury the other half, and as it rots, the wart will drop off. I've seen it happen to people. Or people say if you rub it with a snail, which isn't a very pleasant one. But these old traditional cures, people are actually turning back to instead of away from. People are looking more because, look at the size of this hall. People are into healing, cleansing, mind, body and spirit. That's what they want. And so In Northern Ireland, part of the cleansing ritual is talking. You've heard of the Truth and Reconciliation panels in South Africa. We really need to talk to get it out. And so it's become a ritual now when there's been an occurrence, a killing, even if it's a road accident or something. People want their place on TV, on the TV news, that they can talk and they can say they forgive the person who did this. That has actually become embedded in our culture. You could almost recite what the person's going to say because they've seen it so often before in similar events. So that's a sort of modern day cleansing ritual that I think it helps them come to terms with what's gone on. So as a storyteller, I really believe that getting people talking is very much, people have been making a living out of the couch for a long time, getting people to talk. But I do believe that as a community, we've stopped listening to each other. I was at a very moving panel this morning where there was a lot of discussion on having others to support you within the community. So I'll be happy afterwards in question time to talk some more about the Irish various folk cures, healing cures and so on. But I think each of us has our own personal way of dealing with it. And I just want you to think next Saturday morning of me walking around a forest with a large German Shepherd dog. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Next would be Jean Hughes.
I'd like to begin with just a précis of a story I told. I believe it was yesterday. It's all beginning to flow together. Are some of you discovering this? You know, we're going to need a cleansing ritual of all these words, I think, when we go home. But just briefly, I spoke about a Navajo healing ceremony that I witnessed many years ago, and I spoke about, can you hear me now? A Navajo cleansing ritual, which I was very fortunate to be invited to witness, of a Navajo man who had essentially been given up by Western medicine and then went into a Navajo healing with the Navajo medicine man healing practice. And what I remember is that we had to wait, I think it was almost 3 days before the ceremony was supposed to have begun, because he was involved in his own the Navajo man, the ritual master was involved in his cleansing, whether it was sweat lodges or what, I don't know, but everything went on, and finally he emerged. And the man who was so very, very sick was placed in the center with all his family. And the drum began, and it was steady, and it went on for 7 days and 7 nights with an assistant medicine person coming in. And in the drum, to the drum, the medicine man began to sing the story of Spider-Woman creating the 5 worlds. And the drum on and on and on and on, hour after hour, in fact, day after day. And so long and so complex is this story. And as it went on, it was as if he was tuning into another template of being. You have the frequency of the drum changing the vibration, the frequency, both within us and between us and among us. And at the same time, he was speaking to creation itself, creation, which hold the ever-present origin that holds all the original templates of existence, including the optimal patterns. And then towards the end, with colored sands, he drew on the man's body a mandala, the mandala of Spider-Woman creating the world. And then blew the sands away, and the man stood up, and he was healed, and he lived for another 15 years, instead of dying 3 months later like he was supposed to. What was going on there? First of all, the cleansing ritual, the shifting of the story, moving from pathology to mythology, moving to the great the durative realm, the great archetypal realm, where creation and the great templates of possibility are held all the time, drawing upon different energy systems. And one of the things I think that brought me, that I was so astonished by, having had by that point a very good Western education, is that if you're going to have a traditional allopathic treatment wherein you feel your body is a deceiving monster, you have to counter it with other treatments that allow for a remythologizing, a restoring of the body-mind, which includes a cleansing of the old patterns. And those are the old cultural patterns as well, which is very hard for Western, especially Western Caucasian people, because we are so ingrained with patterns of linearity. If this, then this, and it doesn't work that way. Everything is circular. Everything is in the great, eternal return. One thing I want to say is I believe that we are built for healing. Healing involves the mystery of change, of transformation, and of the incredibly fluid nature of our body, minds, and psyches, and by extension of our societies and cultures. I'm going to make a politically incorrect statement now. I believe that if Bush did not exist, America would have had to invent him to create sufficient cleansing patterns, polarities that allow us to go inside ourselves and really look at the junk as a society that we have accumulated. At the same time, because I travel so much and I'm in many, many countries, one of the things I see is it's very interesting with countries no longer feeling dependent upon America because America has been so demythologized. And there's this second superpower rising in our midst, which is everybody else. I'm finding that these cultures are beginning to reacquire their culture, especially in developing countries, acquiring their authentic culture, so that no longer is the culture a satellite, no longer is the culture a satellite to economics, but economics becomes a satellite to the soul of culture. And so what we're seeing is the rising, again, very slowly but surely, of these other cultures into their full autonomy without dependence. And this, I think, is absolutely critical if we're going to have a world civilization by the end of this century, where the world mind takes a walk with itself. So this may be part of this. This may be, believe it or not, this terrible last election, part of the cleansing process. It's an odd idea, but you may want to think about it. One of the things, as I said, the nature and varieties of healing experience. There are so many. For both persons and societies, seems to be the very condition of our humanity. The training ground for our evolutionary unfoldment, our reason for being. Now, to me, one of the critical issues here is that it is the mystery as whether we regard healing as redemptive or creative, salvational or evolutional. Many of the great world's religions and their leaders, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, in their populist mode, the parts that are meted out to the folks, are essentially redemptive in their philosophies and liturgies. One is always trying to fix the old Adam. Or if one cannot, then one assures one's followers of ultimate fixing in the next place, or radical cleansing in the other, if you would like it. In our traditional medical technology and healing practice, the emphasis is almost entirely on the redemptive. And the redemptive mode is carried over in so many of our other healing programs for substance abuse, the mental and emotional therapies, and yes, for attack and counterattack, for jihad and defense. One has to take on all manner of extreme measures to fix the fallen state. Thus, the high technology of current redemptive medicine and the high technology of armaments that doesn't do a darn thing about any kind of cleansing or really looking at the larger story. Current leadership of this country seems to exist exclusively in the redemptivist mode. We're going to fix you. You're going to have democracy or else. Now, the evolutional state, which the more advanced healer or social artist works on, is an entirely different basis for life and healing. In traditional religions, it's found in the mystic traditions. Herein we find the archetype of transformation. There is somewhere to go. There is something to become. Even illness contains within itself the notion of deconstruction, cleansing, leading to higher reconstruction, chaos leading to cosmos. We are reflections of God, and the illness of self and society serves to open the windows of our mind to receive this reflection in a stronger, purer way. Healing is holing, making whole. Healing is the move from a limited condition, felt in the most painful way, through a process leading to the creation on a new level of a higher order of mind, emotion, and physical being. And this evolutionary agenda, by the way, does not have to be so explicit. For example, the soul and the mind may be healed while the body may seem to remain the same. But generally, even in the continued suffering, something has changed. The wounds in the body or the wounds in society are experienced as doorways to higher consciousness and more evolved forms. And I think to work as a healer within an evolutionary framework, you have to absolutely respect the uniqueness of each person that you're working with. You know, we're not flaky, we are snowflakey in our enormous variations, you know. And as a healer, friends, I think your gift is to empower that uniqueness and the creative abilities so that every person that you're working with is able to take responsibility for their own well-being. And this means that you have to be in the flow of life state itself, which means you have to, as Joaquin has beautifully shown, have to do one or another kind of cleansing process to allow for the flow of healing energy. You see, and you use that flow as the opportunity to bring forth knowledge. You tune into earth currents, life currents, even God currents. This allows you, as healer, your charisma. Then you're able to transfer current or activate the current or the optimal template in the other. And this current is made up of love, of emotional energy, physical energy, subtle body energy, intelligence energy, and God energy or cosmic energy. It's a matter of ignition or reignition. And you are the one who helps people to ignite themselves. And you don't ever take credit for the ignition, or otherwise people just continue in the old dependency models and are led by sheep. And so you become an evocateur who shows people how to access their inner wisdom and knowledge, and through that to activate the healing process. I'd like to close with a story that moved me in my own healing agenda. It happened when I was 15 years old, and I was sent to Texas for the summer, and we got on motorcycles, and I found myself the head of a very young motorcycle gang of young boys. And there were 12 of us because we were trying to imitate somebody. But we had a big old boy with us named Leroy. He was huge. He was 16 years old. He was huge, and he stammered terribly, and they thought he was dumb. And I said, "Tell us, Leroy, tell us how you got your strength." He said, well, it was the Jersey calf. I got it by lifting the Jersey calf. And every day since it was a little bitty thing, I lifted it, and now it's a big old thing, and I can still pick it up off the ground. And I said, "That's great, Leroy, but now we got to put the same kind of lifting into your brains, and you're going to work." And I preached to him. Well, so we had this healing group that went around, not healing, but we went around saving people, which is what you did in Texas in the 1950s. And the boys were getting very bored with me, and they said, "Janie, it's so boring. Why not, like with those Baptist preachers, let's go on out and heal people. Let's start with Leroy." I said, "Oh, no, I don't want to do that." No, Leroy said, no. But they jumped on the motorcycles, and suddenly, Leroy and I were behind. And we had our cleansing ritual, which took place at a taco place, where the boys just shoved things, and Leroy and I, for the first time in our lives, we could not eat. Leroy, for the first time and last time, could not eat. We were just in this state. And then we went to a place where we did the Lindy and the twist. The twist was the twist. And Leroy and I couldn't twist. We were literally cut off from our usual ways of being. And finally, we found a grassy mound, and we got off, and something happened to me. I'm not a crier particularly. I suffer the opposite from an excess of jollity and galloping whimsy during my thing. And that really for me has been a problem because, to take things seriously. But I found myself sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, and I didn't know. It was like all the jokes I had heard from my father and my whimsical mother. All of that was just gone. It was a complete catharsis until I was empty. And suddenly I found myself saying, "Talk to me, Leroy, please talk to me now." He says, I'm not worth it, Jeannie. Please talk to me now. You can talk to me." And I began sobbing again. And Leroy took my hands and he said, "What do you want me to say?" "What do you want me to say?" "I can say anything I want to, and my tongue won't go to get twisted, please." And we waited for about 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, because we knew what he said was going to be the message from God. We knew it was going to be so serious, so potent, and we were there 5 whole minutes, and finally he reached into his mind and he said, "You can be sure if it's Westinghouse." And then this horrible outpouring of commercials. Mutual of San Antonio puts Assurant Insurance. A little old winemaker, me, used Ajax, Bum Bum, the plumbing cleanser. Pepsi-Cola hits the spot. Went on and on and on. And the boys all left, except Leroy and me, and he was so happy, and he said, "See you later, alligator." I said, "After a while, crocodile." And my sort of boyfriend, Floyd, said, "Well, Jeannie, that was pretty good, but now we got to get up to where you can start healing Miss Nina Maud's dog Louie's mange, and my uncle Buddy Bob's, he's got the shingles. You get up to the, no, I suppose by the end of the summer, you get up to where you can raise the dead." I said, "Shut up," you know what I mean. And I know that Leroy went home, and his mama, was a huge woman, was stirring the laundry, you know, over the fire. And she looked at him, he went on, and she said, "What the ever loving hell's wrong with you, Leroy?" Leroy became a very successful insurance agent. But what that is the catharsis can come in all kinds of ways, and then the universe flows through, and the patterns are reconstructed.
Thank you, Gene. Next is Patricia.
Hi, this is just great. It's what I love about this conference, that you have a title and then 4 people come at it from 4 different positions. And if you had 15 people, they could come at it from 15 positions, and you get this wonderful, uncloned, individual stirring up of things that gets your imagination going, hopefully. I was very pleased and honored to be on this panel, and thrilled when I saw that I would be, because it's a subject very close to my own heart and life, and it's a subject that I wish we had a week-long seminar for. There's just so much that one can talk about, and in such detail, and to cut it down and edit oneself is difficult. People often ask me, how did you get going in your spiritual evolution? How did you get started? And I'm always fond of saying it didn't happen by me lying in a hammock on a beautiful day, eating bonbons and reading movie magazines. I think that the impetus toward cleansing and toward healing comes out of crisis. And that crisis, I've become to view disease not as an enemy now, dis-ease as an enemy, but as a gift. Because it is my long-term experience now that in every challenge that I've had to meet in my life, psychological, physical, mental, spiritual, there has been a gift there. There's been something that the only way that I was going to get to the next space on the board, or get into a larger home within myself, or find out more of who I am not, and thereby find out truly who I am, would be by going through this crisis. So I now view these things, and I'm always a little in trepidation when I say something like this, because I think, whoa, what's coming next? But that there is a gift if I will just sit still and try to work with or flow with whatever is going on. It's interesting that the only way that a lodgepole pine can recreate itself is by a 212-degree forest fire. At that point, it spits out its pine cones and drops them, and new life begins. So a crisis brings with it the opportunity for change, and it's been talked about eloquently here. To me, it really is a change of perception. It's a change of changing the channel. I'm being forced to change the channel. You know, everything is perception. If it's a rainy day and I'm feeling great, it is a beautiful day. If it is a sunny day and I'm depressed, it's not a nice day. It's all according as to how I look at it. There are so many modalities now, you know, from when I first started my spiritual work in '72. There's so much going on now. It is so exciting, and I just wanted to bring to the table some recent things. An article, for instance, in, believe it or not just the Washington Post, but the Wall Street Journal, on the healing power of compassion, meditation, and forgiveness. And the Dalai Lama, for several years now, has been holding conferences in Dharamsala, inviting various scientists. As a boy, he was very interested in science and got his hands on as much that he could learn as possible. And so he encourages the marriage of Buddhism and science, and finding the cross-referencing connectives that can take place. And so he gave some of his best meditators, men who had been meditating on this compassion meditation, which is you take in, you imagine yourself the heart, and you take in all the suffering in the world into this heart, pass it through yourself, cleansing it, and sending back out into the world love and compassion. So they took these men and they hooked them up to a bunch of sensors, and they discovered all sorts of beautiful things about them when they did MRIs on them, that their brains took a total different shape. So what they've discovered is what they call neuroplasticity, that the brain is plastic, it can change. And I just want to read a couple of little quotes out of it. It said, the scientists pinpointed regions that were active during compassion meditation. In almost every case, the enhanced activity was greater in the monks' brains than the novices. These are the people who've been doing it for a long period of time. So it's worth it to spend more than a week on it. A sprawling circuit that switches on at the site of suffering, that's in our brain, also showed greater activity in the monks. So did regions responsible for planned movement, as if the monks' brains were itching to go to the aid of those in distress. That is a way to heal our planet, the left and right brain of our Mother Earth, not just the left and right brain of our own brains. It opens up the tantalizing possibility, and this I love, given the latest steroid baseball hearings in the Congress, that opens up the tantalizing possibility that the brain, like the rest of the body, can be altered intentionally. Just as aerobics sculpt the muscles, so mental training sculpts the gray matter in the ways that scientists are only beginning to fathom. How great, we don't need steroids, we can have brain gyms. We all go and we work on our brains and change these. You know, I get so distressed with the idea of capitalism. I mean, maybe it is the best so far. So far. But the whole idea of unending growth. In nature, unending growth creates cancer. And I believe that the human species, we are right now at a point of are we going to survive as a species? And I think the bunny rabbits are kind of voting against us. The animals that we are harming by our actions, the things that we're doing to the environment, etc. But that's another panel. But the whole idea that there is this wisdom of forgiveness that is brought to us by the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu. They did a study of a monk who spent 30 years in prison under the communists, the Chinese. And this monk survived simply by practicing faith and forgiveness. By prayers and working on forgiving his captors. And then I want to talk about some tools. You know, how do you do some of this stuff? It's one thing for us to talk about the general idea, but what are some really practical tools? I just want to say something about the brain. There's neuroplastic. They were thinking that the brain was pretty much what it was, that it didn't change much. They knew, though, that the heart, and this is something I really love, if you take 2 heart cells and you put a heart cell down by itself and leave it, it will die. If you bring another heart cell and put it somewhere in the proximity of that first heart cell, the heart cell that is suffering will begin to beat in the rhythm of the heart cell put down next to it. And they can even put like a little divider between the two cells, and they will continue to beat in synchrony. So, you know, they say the longest distance in the world is between here and here. If we can get those two together, if we can get our hearts moving in synchronicity and take our brains to a brain gym, we're going to be in great shape. What's a good brain gym? First of all, the most important thing you can do today, I think you all know this, is breathe. But breathe in a conscious way, because they know that breathing stills the mind. And we live in such a stressed society. Try and breathe sometime with an ad on television. Shakespeare wrote in iambic pentameter, which goes with the beat of the heart, da 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 da. That goes with the heartbeat. You see a commercial where it's just going, and then you try and breathe with that. What you end up doing is going. You take in breath, but you never breathe out. And the most important part of breathing is the breath out and then letting it drop a little further and then a new breath to come in, because you are cleansing out whatever needs to be cleansed out, and then you are bringing in the oxygen. So breathing is really important. I'll talk about a couple of things because we don't have that much time, but for me, one of the most important things, the way I go about a forgiveness practice is this really works. I'm angry. I once had a spiritual teacher who used to say, leap over your anger. And it turned out he was a very miserable individual. The only way I've found to cleanse myself of someone I can't stand or my anger is I first have to experience it. And I have to really go inside it, which means writing vomit letters. And I have sometimes qualified for the top position as a commandant in a concentration camp, because I let my imagination say the most vile things that come up, because you are literally vomiting that anger. It's in your cells. Another really good thing, because sometimes it is just in your cells and I can't get to the writing, if I'm in a real rage about something, I go to the bed, I take a broom, and I beat out of the bed. And I put whatever's bothering me on the bed, and I say, thy will be done, not mine. This is only an exercise. I mean no harm. And I get it out. And it's amazing how when you're cleansed of it, it's out of your body, you are then able to go to the next step. Okay, so now let's say I'm dealing with somebody that I really have a problem with. I might have to write hate letters for a long time, after a divorce, you know, after breaking up with someone, a problem with an ongoing person at the job or something. So I just write those hate letters, and you pretty soon you begin to kind of run out of steam. You know, there's just not a whole lot left. And then I was encouraged to write a love letter to this person. And you write the love letter wishing for them everything that would be beautiful for them in their lives. You then take that and copy it on a very beautiful piece of stationery. And at the top, you write, dear, your own name, and you mail it to yourself. I have sometimes carried those letters with me for years as a little pick-me-up. What happens is, I think the process of forgiveness and compassion and prayer of that type, the reason it works so brilliantly as a healer is because you really, when you're angry at somebody else, you're really angry at yourself. You cannot see in another person what does not exist in yourself. In the process of doing this, you forgive yourself, you forgive the other person, and if it's somebody that you really have been stuck together with for a long, long time, the only way that I know of to move away from that person and be freely moved away from that person is to go through this process until finally you are able to forgive them, because they really, according to the Course in Miracles, which I follow, it's really whatever they're doing is a cry for help. Another thing that I do if you have a resentment is to just pray for the person that you resent. And you do it, this is the way I do it. I pray for that person's health, their well-being, their prosperity, and the abundance of love in their lives. Their health, their well-being, their, what did I just say? Because it's Friday and my brain is going, huh? There you go. Their health, their well-being, their prosperity, and abundance of love in their life. If you do that for 2 weeks on a consistent basis, every time you think of the person, you will begin to let that person go out of your... The last thing I want to say quickly is I worked with a woman who was dying of AIDS. I have several friends that I kind of worked with them as they went. It's a grisly disease. She was, at the end, a tiny little former shell of herself. The person turns the most grisly brown. It's like dried up tobacco or something. And she had, the person shall remain nameless, somebody who believes in affirmations. She had these affirmations all over their mirrors saying, I am health, I am healing, I am life, I am courage, I am all these things. It made me crazy. And I realized at that point that she was missing the one truth, which is, and I was missing it until I just discovered that death is a healing. And when we hold on to our Terry Schiavos, her healing was to leave this suit of clothes, this old suit of clothes that were no longer serving her. And I believe in reincarnation, to go to a new suit of clothes. I just will quickly finish with something from Heraclitus. Cool dude. The soul is dyed the color of its thoughts. Only think on those things that are in line with your principles and can bear the full light of day. The content of your character is your choice. Day by day, what you choose, what you think, what you do, is who you become. Your integrity is your destiny. It is the light that guides your way. Thank you.
Thank you. I think before we proceed, let's recognize these panelists as a group for the remarks they've made. Okay, we're looking for questions now from the audience. Ask you to come to the mic, please, in the middle.
I think the whole country was harmed by the events of 9/11.
The events of 9/11, he feels the whole company's hard. Put your mouth a little closer to
Does this not work?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
I don't know whether we want to call it post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, but I think we're all in trouble as a result of those events 3.5 years ago. I'd like to hear your comments about what we can do to heal this.
I happen to have a slightly different view about 9/11. I take the view of the Course in Miracles that those 15 men, some of them psychotic and some delusional because of what they had been taught, were actually crying for help. And what breaks my heart about what happened after 9/11 is that for the first 3 weeks in New York, I live in New York, there were no car horns, people on the subway. There was so much love in that city, I cannot tell you. And then the politicians took over and brought fear-based initiative to our city and called them monsters. And then we were on our way to impossibility of healing. Had we looked at it as a cry for help, if you live in a nation where you have one gun and the nation you are facing has nuclear capability, and you are in a rage because you don't want to be and do and think the way they do, and they have invaded they've invaded you for economic reasons, not for spiritual and communal reasons, and you are in a rage, you have to resort to very clever things, and they got a large body count. You know, if you're a military person, you think in terms of body count. If you put a thing around your body and walk into a grocery store and blow up, and you're one person and you blow up 15 people, and you only have 100 men in your army up against the nuclear thing, you've got a pretty good body count there. I don't believe that terrorism there are psychotic people everywhere. But I believe that we can't have larger wars any longer. Terrorism is an adaptation to what a child does when they are in a rage, which is to throw a tantrum. And you begin to do it cleverly, and you are very successful at it. And what we have to do is begin to go to those societies, understand them, allow them to exist as they exist, love them, get to know them, become friends with them, and we might learn something. We will certainly heal ourselves.
Any other remarks from the panel?
I think Patricia has said it so beautifully. You know, I don't know that there's anything else to be said except that clearly with 9/11, the reset button of history was hit. And for as many people that have stayed in a depressed state, because America has been extremely fortunate in the canon of nations when you compare what has happened in Asia or Africa or Europe with the world wars. You know, our last big internal tragedy was the Civil War, really. But still at the same time, I'm aware of so many people who have taken this opportunity to go deeper and to say, you know, to rid themselves of terrorism and fear in themselves. And I think that one of the best things that can happen is that many of you who have really done this are sitting in this audience now, yes? Yes? No? Yes? And this is a time, especially 3.5 years, where you have perspective. We have perspective now. We've seen the results of taking, as you say, the fear initiative. And this is the time to reach out to other people and allow themselves to cleanse and to really begin to create a design for another future. One of the things I think that is so problematic here is that we have no real lure of becoming for what the world can be. Or we look for different fix-its, as I say, or if we do this with the ecology, that could happen. But a larger picture of what the world can be in the 21st century, a larger scenario, it's time to begin to revision together the world that we really want. And then find out, then play backwards from that and say, what is it that I can do to make a difference? So as not feeling so impotent, but to really begin to do whatever one can to serve this larger story, to serve the larger story.
I've lived in Northern Ireland all my life. I've lived there through the 30 years of violence. I was children's librarian in Belfast for 16 years. And I find myself in Mount Kisco, New York State, not too far from the city, when 9/11 happened. I thought, you know, of all the times to be in America. So for me it was, like all of you, it was devastating. But it also made me think back to what it was like in my own very small place. 3,000 people dying in a very tiny place where everybody knew everybody else. But it actually brought out a lot of hurt in me. I've always managed to, you know, no matter what's happened, we keep going. But I find myself there unable to get on a plane to California where I was supposed to be going, or home where I was supposed to be going. And actually, I suppose the expression would be, I more or less freaked out because it was really, really affecting me, and I was totally powerless at home. So I started looking at the things that were important in my life, my mother, my daughter, whom I couldn't get to. And I think that's what a lot of people in America have done since then. What's really, really important. So sometimes something as horrible as that can actually make us look inward at ourselves.
Okay, next.
I want to thank you all for being here. I was thinking about Mr. Munoz's question about what is the collective shadow that we are cleansing. And being a student of history, I think again back about the Inquisition, the 400 years in Europe of burning women, healers, midwives at the stake, people that were in touch with the other realms. And I think about the 400 years, the impact on our shared humanity. And the reason I bring that up is in Boulder lately, it has become politically correct to talk about what they say, white privilege. And, you know, about the different ways our skin color gives us more privileges and benefits. But for me, as a person of mixed heritage, I find that very painful. I want to say, yes, my skin appears white, but it doesn't mean that I am without a heart, without consciousness. My question for Joaquin is, I know that the Inquisition also happened in America, the Spanish Inquisition in the Southwest. And my hope is that we can begin to see that it's not the color of the person, but the culture that the Inquisition brought also to America of so much punishment, punishing the land with pesticides. I have a brain tumor, one of the after effects of so many pesticides. Joaquin, please comment.
I don't know. 400 years is a really long time. And I think actually, never mind. I changed my mind. I do know. I know many of you heard about the shooting in Minnesota, the young Indian boy, the Ojibwa, who killed 10 people on a reservation school. And I noticed that for the first 2 or 3 days after it happened, there was a great deal of reporting from the media, and then it was gone. And it was a collective decision by the nation to say, we're going to deal with this on our own. We don't need the media, and we don't need the rest of greater society to tell us how we can deal with our own issues. So the answer to your question is we have to be allowed to do it on our own.
Okay, next question, please.
I hope this is not too off topic, but I think it kind of relates. Speak loud. Louder?
Put your mouth
Closer.
Sorry. I hope this is not too off topic. There's a very interesting New Age tradition that's been going on over time, the last 30 years, of adapting other cultures' rituals into someone who may not be of that culture. And lately there's been a huge backlash. For instance, in the Maori people in New Zealand are getting very upset because people are trying to make ceremonies out of the moko, which is their ceremonial tattoo, and they feel very attacked by that. And I was wondering if there's possibly a balance. What's your opinion on a balance of adapting other people's cultures, traditions?
Well, I wish my friend Dovie Thomason was here, because she has said often, they've taken our land, they've taken this, they've taken that. When I told her that I'd found in a shop in California a Celtic dream catcher, she just about fell apart. And I certainly, I feel very strongly, Irish is very in. Irish is very in. Many of you are Irish roots and so on. And I have seen an awful lot of bad examples of, you know, groups of tourists. Now they come to Ireland for like bachelor parties and stuff, but I've seen people coming to, you know, do all the old Irish rituals and so on. And probably people are very well meaning, but sometimes it can be greatly resented. I know my friend Dovie would feel that about Indian ceremonies, and I'm sure Joaquin's nodding here as well. So I don't know about the balance. I think each person themselves has to find what works for them, but try not to do it at the expense of somebody else's culture.
I think too, the Dalai Lama is very fond of saying, please be a good Catholic, be a good Methodist, because it's some of this stuff is just kind of in your DNA, you know, and we don't all have to be one thing, you know, diversity. But for me, thank God all that came along, because I was raised Episcopalian, and I just turned away from the whole thing because of a series of experiences, one of them that happened while I was a student here. And I became an existentialist, and I went way off on the polar ice cap by myself and did a lot of self-destructing. And then I got thirsty for the right kind of thirst. And I got thirsty for something. And the first thing that I picked up that was my way back off the polar ice cap was the I Ching. Because another actor who I greatly admired said in a newspaper article that he liked to read the I Ching. And it sounded like the weirdest thing I'd ever heard of. And so I went and got myself one, and I started reading, and it became my teacher. And it was my teacher until I hooked up 2 years later with a Jain, Jain, who Jainism started at the same time as Buddhism, with essentially the same outcome. For the Buddhists, the light goes out, and for the Jains, the light goes on, and you arrive at the same place. They both have the tenets of both. Jainism, as a matter of fact, has a very strong tenet of nonviolence, and Gandhi took all of his ideas from nonviolence from the Jains, employed them in his movement, and Martin Luther King, took all of Gandhi's ideas on nonviolence and put them into his. So we were the benefactor of that. So I had to go way east in order to come home. And to this day, I have trouble saying the word Jesus because it has been so abused. I can say the Christ, but I say Jesus and everything in me goes, all of that, you know. You are healed by the power of Jesus, you know, and that far right evangelical kind of I've got the real solution, and so I had to go east in order to come home, and I'm almost home. I'm with the Course in Miracles now, which is the Christ comes through the Christ tradition, but. I think it comes to, if we're becoming global and we're going to start bumping into each other, and we don't want to all become one thing, but I think if something is approached with, perhaps what's not happening now is people are not approaching with respect. And that's the important thing, that you go and you look at something, you honor it and say, I'll take from this what I can use, but I'm going to leave this as it is here. And respect it as it is.
Just a real fast comment on that. I may be one of the only families in the entire reservation of Bosqua that has Buddhist statues and Buddhist dankas all over the wall. The reason that I mention this is because I think and we talked about this yesterday, Melanie, I think every religion and every aspect of spirituality has something that we can draw from. There are universals that can be drawn from every single part, and to not honor the fact that there is something in Buddhism that I can use, and that there is something in Hinduism that I can use, to not honor that would be to do myself a disservice. Conversely, I'm not going to make it a point to get a Maori tattoo simply because I can do it. I think we can look at the universals, we can draw with the aspects that we can absolutely use, and then sort of leave some things intact and leave some things the way they are.
Also, I think that the collective unconscious is not, I don't want to talk too much, but collective unconscious is not to be denied. And there was a great saint, Tibetan saint, I believe it was Milarepa, if I'm wrong, I apologize, who made a thing that in the world will somehow come to more fullness or reach a place of something when the Tibetan flies to the land of the red man on an iron bird. The first thing that the Dalai Lama did when he came west was to go to the land of the Hopi and he met with the Hopi. And if you lay down some of the symbology in the Hopi tradition, the mythology, all the rest of it, you can almost lay them down, and they're so simultaneous that it's absolutely breathtaking. It's almost like one side of the organism meeting itself and saying, hi.
The actual statement was from Padmasambhava,
Okay.
in the 8th century. And it went, when iron birds shall fly and horses go on wheels, then the people of the white cloud, the Tibetans, will come to the land of the red man, and then the Dharma, meaning the Tibetan teaching, will move throughout the earth, which of course is what's happening.
Yeah.
We're living in the great fusion time of mix and match. We have leaky margins to each other. We're not encapsulated bags of skin or encapsulated bags of culture. Fusionary seeking is an inevitability. And I think, as Joaquin said, it's how you do it with respect. But it's, there are fusion cultures emerging, there are fusion religions emerging. How many of you are Jewish Buddhists who also tap dance and eat macrobiotic food? I mean, it really...
Next question, please.
I'm a little nervous here. First of all, I want to acknowledge all of you for being here. This has been wonderful. The vision you created for us in this room is wonderful. One thing I had a question about was I've seen some possibilities recently with sexual healing. And I was wondering if someone could comment about how they see the future of sexual healing go. If they see sexual healing.
Do you mean people who are addicted to...
No, in terms of the energy release that can come from sexual healing.
As in tantric practice?
Yeah, well, either, go ahead and, I'd just like to hear your comments about.
I'm not actually familiar with tantric practice, but Jean just said an interesting thing. Do you think she's talking about incest? I don't, you know, dysfunction in sexual. I can tell you that when I realized that I had been incested, the moment of realization, I suddenly realized that my self-esteem issues were going to be completely changed as a result of that insight. So the whatever abuse or however, you know, my spiritual teacher used to say, you know, when you mingle your auric kind of persona with another person's, you know, you can do violence to yourself. And the sexual, the sex is there for creativity. It's also there for pleasure. But we do have a lot of, I think, healing. There's so much going on in practices that are taking place now sexually that I think are just they're just an acting out of the inner turmoil that we've been talking about. The inner, it's one way of expressing one's rage or one's fear of what is happening to our world, which just seems to be in, you know, a terrible state of chassis, I believe, from Juno and the Peacock.
I would like to say something else about that. I've seen recently how we associate sex with being wrong, and how it's actually very natural, and that actually the healing is possible through it. And would anybody just like to comment about that? Does anybody agree with me?
I think that anything that's invested with love is possible for healing, whether you express it physically, through music, through art, through conversation. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing like two bodies rubbing together in a nice way.
Thank you.
I would like to say thank you, first of all, to Liz Weir, who went out last year to the homeless shelter and told stories there, and that was really appreciated. That is really putting your money where your mouth is, and we really love that. I heard you again, Liz, just the other day, and you did tell a terrible story. I mean, it was scary, horror-based, where somebody gets their part of their body eliminated, and so forth, that one. So anyway, it brought to mind Robert Bly, who came here in the early 80s and talked about the power of the witch. And I think America is going through a little bit of that with the World Trade Center situation, which came down. My uncle was with the Port Authority and had worked on the World Trade Center and was very proud of it in 1977 when I visited him. And at that time, I said to myself, I thought it would come down. Now that was just kind of a response to somebody being proud of something. And that's how my own intuition works, is when someone says something really in a proud way, I have a bad feeling about something. So my intuition has worked that way many times. But in any case, I think the power of the witch contact...
Do you have a question, ma'am?
Well, I just think that this... I have more comment than anything else, I guess. But I would like to say I think that this... the human will is going to have to be the clear-cut healer. You can't just have healings right and left and right and left. You have to come down on the human will because we're limited. We barely get to know one another in the community. The churches don't even know who each other are. And Buddhism here is saying this chant over and over. I've attended Buddhism. It's an interesting chant. I talk about fusion.
I think we're short on time.
Yeah,
Okay,
can we have the next question,
But I think
please?
we have to bring even Buddhism up to date and get American Buddhist chants in English if we want to have that going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
A little closer, please.
Okay. I would like you to comment, if you would please, on the relationship of the tools that are used in ritual and the actual energies that are created. And what I'm trying to get at is it not the energies that are created out of ritual that actually facilitate the healing?
Because a lot of people recognize the name Yaqui to be correlated to Carlos Castañeda and Don Juan, and the ability to use various psychotropic drugs. I always have somebody come to me during this conference at least once and ask me if I can score them some peyote, or some Jimson weed, or some form of datura. What most people forget, or what most people don't realize, I suppose, is that Carlos Castañeda's first book was specifically focused on psychotropic drugs and their effect on the ability to attain some higher level of consciousness. Every single book he wrote after, which for the most part I realize a lot of people don't read, was the constant statement that those were only tools to a greater end. That because of the way Don Juan tells Carlos, because of the way your mind was set, I had to change your mindset and rearrange your consciousness before. But the true sorcerer, the person who can really attain those states of consciousness, has no need for those drugs at all. And so I tend to in circumstances, I tend to agree with you, and it goes back to the ceremony I talked about, the whipping ceremony in the Yaqui culture. It has less to do with the actual whipping, which does hurt, but it has less to do with that and more to do with the idea that you're being made aware of what you've projected throughout the year, and being made aware that what you say, what you do, and how you act can affect the community, can affect the environment, and then the relationship between all three. So based on the Don Juan comment, I agree that it is more the energy that goes with the tools rather than the actual tools that are what are important.
There's a ritual that I read about in Caroline Mace, who's a psychic healer, and she talked about I'm not sure if it's Navajo tradition or perhaps Southwest, but it's the idea of calling back your spirit. And she tells the story of or maybe it was Navajo, because he was one of the people, during the Second World War, Navajos were used to set up codes because they couldn't be broken by the Germans, because they couldn't imagine what these people are talking about. So he was captured and was in a concentration camp and was brutally tortured by an SS guy. And he came back to the reservation and immediately went into alcoholism and brutality on himself and other people. And finally the elders just said, "That's it for you." And gave him this call back your spirit ceremony, which is to put somebody in icy cold river, time in the river, somehow suspend them in the river until they had called back their spirit. And what you do is you don't have to get in the icy river, but you just imagine, where have I spent my energy today? Where have I sent my mind? And then you just go to where you've sent it and bring it home. And you just pull it back, which is not easy, but you just keep pulling it back. It'll come back, it'll come home. And what happened with this man was he was able to, he became a tribal elder, but he went back to Germany and sought out this man and forgave him. So it's a very powerful, I've tried it myself, it's quite wonderful, because I find my mind walking far, far away with somebody else, and they're taking up space in my head today. So that's a little thing that you can do.
I have found that one of the most important tools in any kind of creative ritual, and creative ritual does not even have to look like a ritual, is something that I would refer to as bringing presence to other times in your life. Bringing presence to other times in your life. I'll just tell briefly my own story. I was 18 or 19 years old. I was that girl you hated in college who had her hand up all the time. I mean, you could have built a bird's nest on me, And I was head of the drama society and this and that, etc. And I had all these people calling me. And my universe, and I was in a state of galloping chutzpah, that's the only way I can describe it. And my universe collapsed with great suddenness. I lost 3 members of my family within about 3 months, including a young man who I love very much. And I was blinded. I was in an off-Broadway theater and the scenery fell on my head and I was blinded. And I could make out shapes and I was blinded for some months. And my grades at Barnard College went from being pretty good to being D+. And I was told that I would have to leave Barnard College at the end of the term because I clearly did not have the mind to do academic work when I said I had in the mind. And the other years I said, yes, dear, but you see, this is what happens to the girls when they get interested in other things. Nowadays we punch them in the snoot, or something like that. And my friends departed from me. I was stripped of all my offices that I held, including head of the drama society, which was the worst of all, as you can imagine. And people started tripping me up in the hall when I had a cane trying to make my way around because of a really awful teacher who told people that I was making this all up, So I took to using an umbrella and to get around. And I went down to the green room every lunchtime because I couldn't face anybody and eating my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And suddenly I had a visitation. I was yelling at God because I felt like Job, I was allowed to take one last course, which was on the Transevaluation of Values in St. Paul and Nietzsche, but the man talked about other things, Anyway, I felt like Job. I kept yelling at God, where are the boils? Because that's all I was missing. And suddenly I had a visitation from myself 20 years later. And I was 38. My 38-year-old self came. Now, I didn't see her or hear her, but her presence was very clear. And she said, look, kid, it's going to be great. You're going to have a very interesting life. And don't think that this is it. So I want you to go out across Columbia University, get out of here, get out of this green room, throw away your peanut butter. Go on. It's going to be a fascinating life, and things are going to shift for you. You're just my lousy hallucination, I kept saying. And they said, never mind what I am. Go out and do it. Go out. It's going to shift. So I went out and I was crossing the Columbia campus with my umbrella, when I heard a voice, and it was the voice of this great professor. And he said, Miss Houston, may I talk to you? You know you have a most interesting mind. I said, me, I have a mind. Yes, the questions you ask are luminous. Tell me, in your opinion, what do you think is the nature of the transvaluation of values in St. Paul and Nietzsche? I said, I don't know. Yes, you do know. You know. You couldn't answer if you did not know. Furthermore, Miss Houston, it's very important for my reflections that I have your reflection. Ooh, did that ever open me up? I said, well, if you put it that way, and I was off and running, I haven't stopped since. And a year and a half after I was to be thrown out of Barnard College, out of Columbia, I was teaching at Columbia. Now, the interesting part is that 20 years later, I am giving an exercise in which I'm having people, it's a beautiful day, having people visit themselves when they were younger, to empower them, to take them to the zoo, to build them up. And it was such a lovely day, I decided to do it myself. And I had had a very happy childhood, so I couldn't go back to the childhood. But I went, and I remembered that girl, and that miserable girl in the green room at Barnard College. And I found myself, hey kid, it's going to be very interesting. I really felt her. It was only months later that I realized the connection. There it is. As a kid, I had met my 38-year-old self, and my 38-year-old self quite spontaneously went to that girl. So I think the question is that we are trans-historical beings, and part of ritual time and space, which transcends space and time as we understand it, is to be able to meet ourselves at different states and evoke who and what we really are.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, panelists, for just a wonderful presentation.
I will send you that.